Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237 as I continue my marathon of Vincent Price films, especially the ones directed by Roger Corman based on Edgar Allan Poe stories. And this time I'm doing The Haunted Palace from 1962, or 1963. Now this one, of the 8 films based on Edgar Allan Poe stories by Roger Corman, and this one even was marketed as Edgar Allan Poe's The Haunted Palace. The title, The Haunted Palace, comes from a short poem by Edgar Allan Poe that was later turned into Fall of the House of Usher. But the story is actually based on The Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft. So, and follow my channel lately, you know that I've been getting more into Lovecraft adaptations. Always been a fan of Lovecraft. He's up there with Poe for one of my favorite writers. So, when I learned that this, Corman, Price, sort of doing the same thing that they did with Poe, now doing with Lovecraft, I was like, really want to see what that's like. And it's kind of funny because of the few films I've already reviewed of the Corman Poe cycle, I think a common criticism I've made is that they don't really seem to capture the gothic atmosphere or the gothic feel of Poe's stories. This one does. I feel like this one actually nails it. And I really like the story to this one. It opens up in, 1765 in Arkham, Massachusetts, so definitely Lovecraft. There's this warlock named Joseph Curwen who's in his palace. He's about to, he's with his mistress, and they're taking this young girl down to the dungeon to do this, can't forget what I want to say, a ritual, wow, excuse me, ritual where this creature will come up and grab her. And the townspeople have known that's where the disappearance of some of the locals have gone is because of him. They storm his palace, take him outside, and they burn him. But before they burn him, he calls out on several of them and says, eventually I will come back and I will have my revenge on each one of you specifically, but I curse the whole town of altogether in the many years to come. Then we jump 110 years later, where the great-great-grandson of Joseph Curwen, Charles Dexter Ward, also played by Price, he inherits the palace, and he goes there with his wife, and she's played by Deborah Paget, I hope is how you pronounce it. And she's still alive. She's 86 years old, but she retired from acting shortly after this film. She married Ling Si Kung in 1962. I guess he was an oil tycoon, and she retired from acting altogether. I did like her performance in this. And there, they look around the palace. They find this one guy who says he's the caretaker, played by Lon Chaney, who says he's the caretaker, but looking at him, you can tell he's a little messed up. He's got like this greenish gray tint to his skin. And the townspeople are not happy that he's there because they know he's staying at the palace. He's a descendant of the warlock, and he has a strong likeness to him. I mean, obviously played by the same actor, but like there's even this one creepy part where, well, even before that, when they're asking for directions, it's a horror movie cliche. People tell them, don't go there, it's a bad place, why don't you just get out and leave, or that place is the bane of this village's existence. But he gets there anyway, and there's one point, him and his wife are walking through the town square, and these deformed people are coming out. Like, there's a guy just like no eye, just like skin over his eye. Little girl, both eyes. Another guy with both eyes. Another guy with like a big, long nose. Kind of looks similar to the pig face in Eye of the Beholder of Twilight Zone. Could have been the same effects person, actually. Actually, I'm just looking, because now that I say that, I'm actually kind of curious. This was Lon Chaney's only appearance in a Corman film. He co-starred with Price in Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein, but he didn't share any scenes with Price. That was 15 years prior. Yeah, I really do like Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein. That is the best of their films. I have reviewed that. Chaney's role was originally supposed to be played by Karloff, but Karloff was sick from shooting Black Sabbath of Italy, which I think that was for the better. I mean, I say put Karloff in anything, and it would have been better, but he was definitely perfect for Black Sabbath, even though he would have been done in time. It doesn't really matter. They used a forest perspective to make the village seem larger, which the front of the palace and the underground dungeon was the same that was used in Corman's The Terror with Karloff and a very young and unknown Jack Nicholson. Francis Ford Coppola provided additional dialogue. Stock footage from this was used in Madhouse, which I think I mentioned in my review for that film. So there's some cool stuff in here. At the beginning and the end of the film, Price's warlock version of the character, Joseph Kerwin, recites lines 41 through 44 of the poem. And then at the end, it's 45 through 48, which was typical for a Corman film. He always started and ended with quotes. I know, I usually put information at the beginning and at the end of the review, and I just do the plot straight through. I'm tired. But, so yeah, they're going through the Times Square, and those people with the deformities kind of corner them. Of course, they're sketched out, and then they just kind of go away. And then they befriend this one doctor, Dr. Marinus Willett, played by Frank Maxwell, who he knows about the town's history. He tells them, why people behave that way. And because that's the curse that Kerwin put on the village, was some sort of deformities, physically or mentally. Because one of the descendants, I didn't catch all their names, but One of them, he has his son up in the attic, and he's like a ravenous beast. Like, we see him, he feeds him through like a slot in a door, and he's got like a green monster hand. And that's when he refers to, like, fills him in on who Joseph Curwen was, what he did, and that he had the book called of Necronomicon, which, of course, is eponymous with H.P. Lovecraft. I believe this was the first adaptation of one of his stories, thus making it the first to mention the Necronomicon. He even mentions the Elder Gods. He mentions Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth. I always have a hard time. Yog-Sothoth. Always struggle with that name. It's not that I don't know what it is, I've just always struggled saying it. And the Necronomicon does make an appearance. You find out that Lon Chaney and this other guy, Jabez, he didn't really say his name very much, played by Milton Parsons. They're both kind of green tinted, dead looking guys. They were friends and acquaintances of his 110 years ago. They're fellow warlocks. And there's a painting of Curwen in the foyer, I guess is what it would be in the palace. And when Price looks at it, he seems to be possessed by Curwen. Curwen takes over. And at first, it's very shortly, and they have like internal battles. And as the film progresses, he's able to take more and more control over him. Which, when he does, he's very hostile towards his wife, very mean. But he's very accommodating to the other two warlocks. And they talk about pursuing their work, which now they want to resurrect Hester, his old mistress, which she was played by Kathy Merchant. So they start robbing bodies from the cemetery, and that's what gets the townspeople curious that something's going on up at the palace again. And then eventually Price, Curwen, because he's two characters in this, and Price, there has not been a film yet where I was disappointed with his performance. And now with this, where he's playing two people, the really mild-mannered Charles Dexter Ward and the evil warlock Joseph Curwen, he does a great job with both. He wants to get revenge on the descendants of those that he picked out, which he does. He, the one that has the monstrous son, he lets him loose. It was like a montage of them. Another one he killed with fire. I guess it didn't show all of them. And then when Curwen takes complete control for pretty much the rest of the film, his wife has been talking to the doctor about how he's been acting strange, and he's been filling her in on what the townspeople are like. He even tries to rape her. It's definitely the most, at least in that regard, the most sadistic that I've seen Vincent Price do. Especially for that time, 1963. Without going into too much detail, obviously he doesn't go last house on the left on her, but still very forcibly. And then she slaps him and he just calls her a fool. But then, towards the end, townspeople, they all come back because they find the descendant that was burnt. They storm the palace. They successfully resurrect his mistress. And then Ward's wife is offered as a sacrifice to the creature for the ritual at the very beginning of the film. But then the painting of Kerwin gets destroyed and his hold gets lifted. And by this point, the palace is pretty much in flames. And his mistress and his warlocks, like, fled for their own safety and, like, left him to die. So the doctor saves him. And then when Anne asks if he's alright, he's just like, he says, oh yes, my dear, I'm fine. And he looks at the camera, he's like, very fine. Or however he says it. Indicating that he's still under some sort of possession. We get the rest of the poem by Poe. And I do have to say that this one was one of the Corman Price films is one of the more better paced. It definitely captures its gothic atmosphere a lot better than the other ones. Which I know not every Poe story is, completely gothic. I just know that's what he's known for. Also, I've read Poe for years. But of course, this is Lovecraft, and I think they did a good job with the story. I like that they mention Necronomicon. They mention Cthulhu. I don't know why it's so fucking hard for me to say shit sometimes. I liked, it was nice seeing Lon Chaney. He did look really old. It was like seeing the last of the Universal guys. Acting with, who was essentially, the new star of horror. So of course this was also at the dawn of Hammer. So Cushing and Lee were also rising at the same time. But I really enjoyed this. I like the idea of, this warlock that's had this hold over this village. And then one of his descendants comes in, he gets possessed, takes over, pretty much picks up where he left off. Price did a wonderful job, as always. He could play, like I said, the gentleman and the warlock, both with equal class, but with as good and bad that there should be in each one. Again, I haven't seen a bad performance by Vincent Price. Hell, even Edward Scissorhands, with like the 2 minutes he's in that, he does amazing. He's like Peter Cushing. Every role he treats like he's trying to get an Oscar. I would say probably of the Poe cycle, this one's my favorite. Ironically enough, it's a Lovecraft, just named after Poe. But I would have to say it's my favorite. Because I loved the story, loved the atmosphere. It had more genuine creepy moments. Like with finding out the townspeople, some of them are super deformed, like the monster in the attic. Or just like the people with the physical deformities that kind of act sort of not quite like zombies, but more like Carnival of Souls. I'm excited to watch Tower of London, which isn't a Poe story, but it's based on Richard III, one of the most evil men in history. I mean, he wasn't like Hitler or anything, but, he was just a very, you know, evil person. Which, of course, is going to be hard to beat of Lawrence Oliver's performance as Richard III in Richard III from 1955. One of the greatest villains of all time. But I'm stoked to see that at some point in this marathon. But yeah, Haunted Palace. It's a Poe film based on a Lovecraft story. And I think they did a great job with it. It's not balls to the wall fun like Reanimator, like over the top, just horror, comedy, popcorn fun. Plus, that's also like my 6th or 7th favorite movie of all time. And it's not like visually stunning, like Color Out of Space. I do have Dagon. I haven't seen it yet. There's a whole list of films of his I haven't seen yet. But it tells the story and it does a great job with it. Say Haunted Palace. Again, ironically, favorite of the Poe cycle, even though it's a Lovecraft story. But that's Haunted Palace, and thank you for watching.